Ladies and gentlemen, we are commencing special session 1 now on the theme Sustainable Growth with Energy Independence. May I request the panelists to take their place on the dais. Mr. NaveenUnni. Joining him in this conversation are Ms. Ulka Kelkar and Ms. Mridula Ramesh. May I request all the panelists to take their place on the dais. So may I just remind you that you can scan the QR code and send us the questions for all 3 special sessions. And there are some volunteers of ours who are available in this hall. In case you're not able to, connectivity issues are there, you could ask for the question slips. Please send in your questions if there are any. Please. Yeah, please take it. Let's welcome them with a round of applause. Yeah. Session is on energy, so I think let's show them some energy from the audience. Great. Before we commence this special session, it's my privilege to announce that a book titled Watershed: How We Destroyed India's Water and How We Can Save It has been authored by Ms. Mridula Ramesh. It's available for your reading pleasure outside the hall. Kindly procure, and she's kindly agreed to autograph your personal copy of the book as well. Thank you, Ms. Mridula. And yeah, I think she deserves a round of applause because such a kind of a subject, a very complicated subject, a very complex subject that she's authored a book on. Now, it's also a pleasure to announce that Ms. Mridula will present a copy of the book to her co-panelists in this session. May I have the books, please? So this is the book. I think all 3 of you could stand with a copy of the book. I'll take a photo. You can also take a copy and for the photograph. Yeah. Yeah. Right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a round of applause. A fantastic book. I think all of us should take a copy and go through it. A very, very interesting subject. May I have the AV of the panelists, please?
Mr. NaveenUnni is the managing partner of McKinsey's Chennai office. He has extensive experience in large-scale organizational transformation for utility companies, companies in the core sector, and the agri-cooperative sector. Mr. Unni has co-authored several articles and publications and regularly speaks at public forums. He is an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad and BTech in Civil Engineering from the IIT Madras. Ms. Ulka Kelkar is a director at World Resources Institute, India. She is an economist with more than 2 decades of work in climate policy. She assesses low-carbon development pathways for India and supports climate action in Indian states and cities. Ms. Kelkar previously worked as a consultant climate assessment specialist for the Asian Development Bank ADB and as a research fellow with the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI. She is a co-chair of the Think 20 Task Force and official engagement group of G20. Ms. Mridula Ramesh is the award-winning author of the critically acclaimed The Climate Solution and Watershed and the founder of Sundaram Climate Institute, which focuses on waste and water solutions. She is an active clean tech angel investor with a portfolio of over 20 startups and is involved with several initiatives to spur climate tech entrepreneurship. A graduate with distinction from Cornell University and an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management, Mridula worked at McKinsey in Silicon Valley and is the executive director of Sundaram Textiles, the company that was among the first textile companies globally to win the coveted TPM Excellence Award.
Now, may I request Mr. Naveen to take the discussion forward.
Good afternoon. Great. Before I make my opening remarks, I just want to say a couple of things. I think the first, I'm just looking to see Group Captain. I met Vijay Kumar first, I think in 2009, when we had a discussion about supporting this event, the MMA annual convention. And so 13 years partnership that has almost continued through COVID, through every up and down. So I just wanted to say thank you for the friendship and the partnership we've had over these years. It's been a real privilege to support the annual convention as we are doing this year. I'm sure for many more years to come. So I think that's great. The second thing I want to say is this book. I've already spoken about Watershed before, and I've said good things about it. At some point, I'm sure Mridula is to consider giving me royalties, but let me do it once more. If you do have the chance to read one book on water and the broader, both the challenges, but the evolution of how kind of water has been in this country, I don't think you should look further than Watershed. It's a fantastic book. It's well researched. It's well written. It's provocative. I think every Indian, I think, should get it and read it. I think it's a real privilege to read it. Thank you, Mridula, for writing it. So today's session, my last comment before I get into my opening remarks, today's session is about an hour. So what I'm going to do is just give you a few opening remarks just to frame today's conversation on energy independence and the connection to sustainable inclusive growth. And then we'll hear from both our esteemed panelists, after which we will have a few questions that I'll start with, but I'm also looking forward to some great questions from the audience. The way it's going to happen is we're going to have little sheets of paper that are going around. Please write your name, the institution you represent, and the question. The reason we do that, of course, is in the past, we've had lots of people who have risen to ask a question and then made a speech. And so we're going to get some questions, hopefully, from the audience, and we're really looking forward to that. I do intend to make this a discussion, not just a panel of speakers. So we will look forward to a provocative and thought-provoking session, especially given all the conversations that have happened to this point. So let me start with this idea of a sustainable inclusive growth and where does energy independence come in. The reality is India as a country is highly dependent. And if we were to create self-sufficiency and a true sustainable inclusive growth paradigm, energy independence is a core part of that. Right? If you look at our forex that goes towards importing some form of the energy or the other, the reality is we are still quite dependent in many ways. And therefore, to break out of this sufficiency or break out of this dependence, I think energy independence is a must. And therefore, today's session, the special session, the first special session we're going to do is quite important in that context. When I look at the movement towards energy independence, I'd say the first thing is a lot of optimism, right? Because there's several things that are driving the trends. You heard some of this from our panelists earlier today. Jayadit, my colleague from McKinsey, talked about sustainability and the ideas driving that. You heard from Iyer about the fact that India is leading on climate action. Now, whether India is leading on climate action or not, we can debate that. But the reality is there are several trends that are heading in the right direction. So let me call out 4 trends that I think are hugely positive and are helping us. And then I'll come to some of the challenges and what we should probably talk about and address in the subsequent discussion. The first is our geographic advantage. Given where we are, the solar radiation that we get, in spite of the fact that over the last couple of years, solar radiation has gone down a little bit, the reality is the solar radiation is quite good, but we just don't have only solar radiation. We have great onshore, offshore wind factors. We have excellent hydro. And so if you look at the overall energy portfolio that we have from a renewable standpoint, it is fantastic. And we're truly privileged to have this level of renewable energy options around us. That's the first. The second, and you heard this from Parameswaran, we have strong government support, whether it's in the NDCs, but what I really took out of the Honorable Prime Minister's Panchamrit when he announced this in COP26 about 15 months ago, was not the longer term agenda of net zero by 2070, but the nearer term agenda of what we want to achieve by 2030, right? Including going to 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by then. We're currently at about 160 to 170 gigawatts. The challenge is quite significant, but even setting an ambition of this nature was pretty good. Reducing our overall energy intensity by 45%, etc. So there's some very significant goals that the government has taken, and there's really strong support, whether it's the National Hydrogen Mission, the new circularity mission that will come in, regulation supporting, whether it's through extended producer responsibility, etc. There's a lot of regulation support, and including some of the climate infrastructure support announced in the recent budget. So clearly there is strong government support to this. The third dimension is the net zero commitments by leading corporates. And this is also quite interesting, given the kind of ESG push and the ESG drive. Several leading corporates, and I could name in the top 1,000 companies, many companies that have made very strong net zero goals. Not net zero by 2070, but closer, net zero by 2050, 40, 30. I have some clients who even have net zero goals by 2025. Truly ambitious, really trying to make a difference in terms of decarbonization. And the last is growth in green financing. Over the last I would say over the last 5 years, every couple of years, the amount of money available for green finance has doubled and will double over the next few years as well. So as you look at all the green finance that's coming in, again, Iyer talked about some of the global north to south climate financing. For example, the GFANZ, the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero, had committed something to the tune of 130 trillion to actually transition, right, money from the global north to the global south. And over this period, hopefully we should expect to start seeing some of that money coming in. G20, of which obviously India is the host nation, has a significant discussion around how do we actually start facilitating more of that. What we heard from Mr. Iyer today, as he's going to the World Bank and reforming multilateral institutions to start making some of those transfers possible, is a big part of that. So clearly a lot of great momentum and, a lot of drive towards this. But the reality is there are some significant challenges that face us. And hopefully as we talk about today, we want to talk about both the optimism that we should have from these momentum drivers, but also how we overcome some of these challenges. The first very real challenge that faces us is practical reality on the ground, right? Whether it is land issues for renewable energy. Recently, we did a piece of work on India decarbonization pathways. We published a report in November. And one of the big surprises for us was, given all the things that have to happen in India, whether it's regenerative agriculture, growing renewable energy, urbanization, etc., we might be short of land by about 15%. So we have significant land mass, but we might need another 15% to do all of the things that we need to do and support the population that we have and support our renewable energy goals. So we have some real challenges around land, but land is only one of the challenges. We have critical infrastructure gaps. We have many issues, which are, even though renewable energy is in the money, making renewable energy practical at the scale that we want to is quite hard. For example, we don't manufacture any of the solar panels that we need. A large part of that manufacturing comes out of China. And while there have been announcements made to get to the 40 to 50 gigawatts a year that we need to build to achieve a 500 gigawatt by 2030 challenge, is quite a significant issue. The second is, how do we start reliably integrating large-scale renewable energy? And one of the challenges around that is batteries. Now, batteries have obviously two roles to play. One is in electric vehicles. Again, I'll refer to what Mr. Iyer talked about, that by 2030, the ambition is to not have any internal combustion engines manufactured, and therefore transitioning not just two-wheelers and three-wheelers, but also four-wheelers, buses, and trucks to electric vehicles. The batteries required for those. But the second requirement for batteries is to integrate into the grid. You can imagine that renewable energy has a very intermittent profile, right? The sun shines during the day, we get a lot of energy, and during night we don't. So the way to manage that in a large grid is through grid scale storage, energy storage or batteries. And one of the challenges that we have for both electric vehicles and for this grid scale batteries is the fact that we don't have many of the materials that are going into these batteries, right? Lithium, other rare earths, nickel, cobalt, many of these materials. And the challenge for us as a nation, and one of the questions that we've got to ask ourselves is, are we trading one form of energy insecurity, which is through oil and gas import, for another form of energy insecurity, which is lithium and other rare earths? So how do we actually supplement our energy security on this new dimension? So that is a second big challenge I'd like to put forward for us. The third is how do we improve the financial viability given the state of several of the public discoms, right? If you look at distribution companies in this country, there's about 71 discoms. The state of finances is not very healthy. And how do you actually improve that? Because if you don't have the financial viability, you don't have the strong and stable grids that will support renewable energy at scale, which is required for energy independence. So how do you actually improve the financial viability of these discoms? And finally, if you look between the state, center, between the different government departments, it has improved, but we don't have the necessary cohesion and a roadmap that will actually outline the path going forward. And so you have people operating at cross purposes. For example, a state will suddenly say, listen, from today onwards, we will not wheel any renewable energy power out of our state into another state. It's very hard to operate a long-term plant of any sort or put long-term capital when the policy uncertainty is as high as it is now, and when you can have last-minute changes. So how do you actually improve the cohesion between these departments and also improve the policy certainty that allows long-term capital to come into these opportunities? So those are the four challenges. We'll talk about some of these, and hopefully as we hear from our speakers, we'll have the opportunity to discuss some of these in great detail. But having said that, as we kick this off, I just want to say that I'm hugely optimistic. When we did this decarbonization pathways report, one of the pleasant surprises was that India has a very unique opportunity of building 3/4 of this country over the next 30 years, which Jayadit also mentioned in his speech. The reality is, as we build a lot of this, we have a unique opportunity to build it first time right and first time green, which pretty much any large nation of our size does not have. And I include China in this. How we use this opportunity over the next decade and a half, over the next 15 to 20 years, will really determine our role in the climate future and whether we can create a sustainable, inclusive growth future for ourselves. With that, let me close my opening remarks, and I'd like to invite Ulka to say a few words to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to MMA for the invitation. I don't know if you can see me over the flowers, but could I have that? Yeah. So for me, this topic is extremely difficult. Energy independent, sustainable, inclusive, and growth. All four to have at the same time, to me, does not sound very simple. And I think that's what you've heard from the various speakers today. In Western countries, for example, economists have spoken about an environmental Kuznets curve, that first you grow, then you take care of the environment after you become rich enough. In Scandinavian countries, for example, Norway, they were set up on oil wealth. They created a sovereign fund, and now they are very strong on welfare schemes and also on international development aid. So the inclusion comes after the growth. Energy independence, we are seeing, of course, wars being fought over oil and gas, the security of the supply over the last several decades. So in India, as Naveen very rightly said, our growth lies ahead of us. And can we do what no country has done before, which is to grow in a way that is sustainable, inclusive, and also independent? So to me, energy independence also means freedom from dirty, polluting fossil fuels. To me, energy independence means reliable energy access so that you can have vibrant, diversified livelihoods. But each of these elements, the sustainable, the inclusive, will require special attention and deliberate policies. So with that kind of context, I wanted to show you a dashboard that WRI has. We believe in open access data, so a lot of this research is available publicly. So a lot of the back of the hall is very young people. And you heard people talk about Amrit Kal, right? The next 25, 30 years of India's growth. From 2020 to 2050, say over the next 30 years, do you know how much India's emissions are going to increase? India's CO2 emissions? Any guesses? You can see the line, but I don't know if your eyes are sharp enough to read the numbers. So do you think it's going to be double, triple, 10 times? Huh? Double. Huh? You'll have to speak louder. 3x. Yeah, that's correct. That is correct. So it's not a huge challenge. It's not, when we keep saying exponential or we keep imagining, it's always good to identify what is the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with. So right now we're somewhere around 2-3 million tons of CO2 per year, billion tons of CO2. And that's going to become 6 billion tons of CO2 in 30 years. So somewhere between double, triple, depends on how optimistic you are about growth. And just to give you a sense of the world as a whole, it's about 50 billion tons. So 50 billion tons, about 3 is ours. What do you think is going to happen to energy sector emissions over the same period? This is total emissions for the country. What do you think is going to happen to the electricity, the energy supply? Is it also going to go by 2 times, 3 times? Yes or no? Let's see how many people think that energy sector emissions will also grow 2 times, 3 times. Some people are putting up their hands. You'll be surprised to know. It's almost going to be flat. And this is business as usual. This is current trends continue. No additional policies, no net zero and all of that yet. So as our current electricity system is developing, more renewables are coming in. We see that even in this decade already, we see emissions from the energy sector flattening out. What happens to industry? Do you think industry sector will also see the same kind of flattening out? Yeah, you think so? We have an optimist over here. Oh, it's a little worse, in fact, than the national average. So it's going from around 1,000 to around 3,000. And that's really the challenge, the harder to abate sectors. Because industry uses fossil fuels for energy, but it also uses them in feedstock, and there are process emissions that are also generated in the steel sector, in the cement sector. That's why they're called the harder to abate sectors. Now, if India were to go from this business as usual, 2 times, 3 times growth, to the net zero that we are hoping to do, we need to be on a completely different pathway. This is just one scenario, right? This is something that researchers like me have imagined. You could have different assumptions and you can play with this simulator. It's there on the internet. And you could maybe have a scenario where like the Western countries, our emissions first grow up very rapidly and then come down, maybe hopefully very rapidly. But either way, there will need to be a significant deviation from the business as usual trajectory. And that's not going to be easy. Let's just have a look at. This is the business as usual, right? So remember, we saw energy sector emissions already flattening out because we see a lot of solar already coming in just on cost factors. But you also see the coal, the gray line, the gray band down there, the coal staying in the business as usual scenario. The yellow, the solar is going up, the light blue, the wind is going up. But unless coal, is phased down, emissions will continue to grow. In order to be aligned with a net zero future for India, net zero 2070, we need the solar to go up even more, which means all of the challenges of battery storage that Naveen spoke about. And we need coal to slowly phase down, to slowly taper down. Otherwise, the emissions are not going to be aligned with our net zero 2070 pathway. That's just in the power sector. Let's just see, for example, what else needs to happen. And you see that to go from that black line that was going up to the green line that's going down, you need actions to happen in almost every sector, almost every sector. The different colors are just telling you the different sectors, yeah? So there is no single silver bullet. However, if I were to take all those actions, all those options, and arrange them by cost, from the least cost to the highest cost, we find that there are some actions which are actually negative cost. What does that mean to have something that's negative cost? It means that what you save in the energy, in the fuel, in the efficiency, it pays for itself. The challenge, of course, is that the investment cost is upfront, and the savings, for example, the import bill that Naveen spoke about, they take time to come. Let's just see what happens in terms of jobs. Is it good for jobs? And we see that indeed there are positive effects on jobs, both in the utility sector with the construction of new solar plants and also in the manufacturing sector. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing this dashboard. You can take it off and just end with a few remarks about the inclusive aspect and the jobs aspects, and particularly because we're in Chennai with reference to Tamil Nadu, which is a very big economy. And in 8 of the top 10 most energy intensive sectors in India, in 8 of those, Tamil Nadu is in the top 3 ranks. So all of the energy intensive sectors are very important for Tamil Nadu. Naveen spoke about the energy transition. Other panelists also spoke. Some of our work with the MSME sector in Tamil Nadu with the FAME Facilitating MSME Agency has shown that there will be specific elements, specific parts of the supply chain as we transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles that may be at more risk. Perhaps there will be need for skilling. One example is that of the foundry sector. So what happens is that as we move from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, there is a reduction in the demand for ferrous casting and an increase in the demand for aluminum casting from the auto industry. And in Coimbatore cluster where we're working, there are 700 foundries and 500 of those are ferrous. So there will be special attention that will be required for specific MSME clusters. They'll have to be nimble. They might have to pivot to other industries and so on. For women in particular, we find, do you know that in the southern states in India, how many of India's total women factory workers are in the southern states? Any guesses? So if there were 100 factory workers who are women in India, how many of those would be in the south? 70, 75, exactly. So that's pretty amazing, right? And in fact, we find that in Tamil Nadu is the second highest state in terms of women-owned enterprises. So there's obviously things that are going well here that we need to replicate, learn from. We can't change social norms that fast, but we can put into place many of the initiatives that are being done, for example, with providing safe transport for women, training programs where they're able to attend them, child care and creches in the facility where women are working. And one example I want to give you is from Karnataka. So I've come here from Bangalore. In Karnataka, for example, in every village panchayat, there are initiatives being made for better management, better collection of municipal solid waste. But also women from that village are being trained to drive those waste collection vehicles, the auto tippers. So definitely on this side, there'll be a lot that will need to be done on inclusion. I'll just end with one last point, which is, Naveen also spoke about land, and that's going to be crucially important. Again, if you see a study that my colleagues have done, we find that 70% of the utility scale solar parks in India recently have come up on crop land, not on arid desert land or grassland, but on agricultural land. And that's because, if, for example, in the Pavagada solar park in Karnataka, if there is a leasing of land possible, a lease income, then this is something that is a good option for farmers, for landholding farmers. It's better than being subject to the vagaries of the weather. But for the landless or the pastoralists, they don't benefit from the lease income. They don't really get too many jobs on the solar park itself. And then they have no alternative but to migrate to the city because they no longer have access to their previous livelihoods. Mridula has written about water. One of the interesting things that the MNRE, the Ministry for New and Renewable Energy, did was that when it found that solar panels were extracting water for cleaning, the ministry issued a technical order saying you must use robotic dry cleaning. And so you don't need to use the precious water where the solar park has come up. So there's a lot that the government can do. There's a lot that industry can do voluntarily and in terms of a regulation to make sure that all of the actions that are being done from a sustainability perspective are also inclusive in nature. So with that, thank you very much for your patience and thanks.
Great. Good afternoon. First, thank you, MMA and all the friends I see here, and for a very warm launch to the paperback edition. It's very gratifying, and I'm very grateful. Thanks, Naveen, again. We'll talk about royalty separately, but thanks for the shout out. So, when you look at the title, sustainable growth, it tells us how far this conversation has moved in the last 8 years, right? And I'll come to that in the end. But today, when I just want to frame opening remarks, it's a question of finding a path. And the analogy I want you to think of, and I want you to keep in your mind, is of a boat that is crossing a river, right? The first part is in the title of this event is growth, right? Because that half are all students. If India doesn't grow, you don't have jobs, right? And it's fair to say if India doesn't grow, most of us here will be unemployed. So that's the first constraint. It's a non-negotiable. We need to grow. The second is the boat itself, right? So we've heard repeatedly about carbon, and just taking a step back and putting on my teacher's hat. The reason we're all in this climate change mess is because we emit carbon, and that warms the planet, and therefore we have to stop emitting carbon dioxide, methane, and all the different forms of carbon that warm the planet, and try to reverse some of the warming that's happening. Fair enough. But what is less spoken about, and what we all need to understand, and I think people from Madras really understand, is India is probably one of the most vulnerable countries to the climate, and the climate has already changed, right? I think the Chennai floods of 2015, many of you will have interesting stories to say about how you escaped. I have one too, we can talk about it later. And then the Chennai water crisis of 2019, where you see the way India is affected. You're going to, in the next 10 to 20 years, you're going to see agricultural yields fall, right? We'll come to independence in a moment, but the seas are going to rise. I'm sure many of you in the last week have read about a report that talked about climate vulnerabilities of several Indian states, Assam, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, all there. And all those vulnerabilities come in one language, which is the language of water. So people will be saying, Mridula writes about water. Mridula actually writes about climate. And to me, climate is water, right? So coming back to this analogy of the boat crossing the river, what I'm trying to say is India is a rickety boat. We're a great country. We've done great things. But I think we need to recognize this constraint that we have a rickety boat simply because we are vulnerable. And because I see people in manufacturing who are embedded in global supply chains, that vulnerability is going to come and pinch. Okay, and I'll tell you why. Today, many of you would have heard of this China plus one. I'm in textiles. We are seeing some of the impacts of China plus one and global supply chains resculpting. And that doesn't happen very often because it's a pain in the neck to change supply chains. Once you do it, you don't want to change it. So think of a guy or a woman sitting in Europe and America trying to decide where to buy their fabric from. Will you locate your factory in a place which is saying, I'm going to say it in Tamil and then I'll translate. Thanniye illa factory is shut. Okay, or you see headlines with your factory being flooded. Would you locate your supply chain hub there? That node there? No, you are not going to do it. So that's a constraint that India has to deal with. The fact that we are vulnerable. That makes our boat a little rickety, and we have to figure out how to deal with that. The third constraint, and I'm going to the title of our panel, which is independence. We are getting into a decidedly unsettled world. Okay, we don't get along very well with our neighbors. The Ukraine war has shown that energy independence is pretty important. Naveen did allude to this. Are we sort of, by going from oil to electric mobility, are we exchanging oil independence for mineral dependence? To put it more bluntly, are we replacing Saudi Arabia with China? Right? Because you really don't want China with their hand on your neck. So that's the third constraint that we have. So again, in your analogy of the boat crossing the river, you have a river, you have a boat, the boat's a little rickety. And now this changing climate is making the waters a little more volatile, okay? And the rapids are coming up. And then this whole independence and the Ukraine war and this minerals and all that is adding rapids, little hidden rocks that you have to navigate. You get the idea of the constraints that we have to go to. The last constraint, and it was alluded to, we're a democracy, right? I'm not China where I can say, today we shall outlaw everything and we shall do this and, expect things to be followed. We're not going to do it. There'll be some 15 people who will tell you you're an idiot in the first front page of the news. There are another 3 people who will say you're corrupt. Then there'll be the 4 people who will question your parentage. We're a raucous democracy. Most important, we won't get votes. You lose the election, you can't do anything. So with all these, so any policy that you come up with has to be democratically salient. And in my book, I've actually looked at every suggestion that I go through the democratic lens. And it's a little depressing, but you can do it. So the question is, can we get this boat across this river? This slightly rickety boat in a very, surging, turbulent river with rapids in the middle. That's our challenge. And that's sustainable growth with all these constraints. Can we do it? I would say yes, we can. It's a small window, it's a tiny window of opportunity, but I think you can. And I'm going to give 2 examples, okay, very personal examples. There's a lot of data coming from my fellow panelists, so I'll keep it more personal. The first example is the startups that I see exploding. When I started investing in 2015, and I came out and I said, look, I'm only going to do climate startups and I'm only going to do adaptation. People thought I was completely mad. And every 3 months, if I got a startup, I would think it was a good quarter. I'm seeing several a week. I know many of us were here. This has become a kshetradanam, but many of us were here a couple of months ago, and this entire hall was packed full of clean tech startups. That's how far and fast we have come. There is a wall of money coming towards how to do clean tech startups, and you just have to wander around this campus to find out how far and fast we have come. And I see a lot of my startup founders in their mid-40s, some in their 50s. That shows, especially for the students there, this is a very real possibility. I mean, this is going to be, I've heard say that climate tech is the next digital. So, 20 years ago, Google was your place to work in. In the next 20 years, it's going to be a climate tech startup that's going to become the next Google. So that really gives me hope. The second part that gives me hope is actually MMA. And I'm going to talk about group captain who I met several years ago. And the first time I spoke on climate was in, I think, mid-afternoon. Dr. Bala was chairing it and I spoke about climate and people said, oh, really? And I know in my family, when I started writing about climate and started getting into it, they thought it was a midlife crisis gone badly wrong. Right? And now I get less of that. Today, the whole leadership conclave has sustainability as its title itself. That shows how far this conversation has moved. I was actually surprised on the industrial emissions, because I am my day job in textiles, I am an SME, very squarely in the small and medium enterprise. We are 60% renewable. We're going renewable not because we want, conscience, or not because their, executive director is having a midlife crisis. We're going because, renewable energy is the cheapest thing out there. So it gives me hope. Yes, it's a rickety boat. Yes, there are rapids in the water, but I think we can get across. Thank you.
Volume.
Maybe just volume. Okay.
Yeah. Is it okay
Back
now?
in. It's cutting in and out. Okay, not anymore. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Ulka. Thank you, Mridula, for that. Very different ends of the spectrum, right? So let me ask a couple of questions to warm us up. And then you can see I've got a whole sheaf that we'll get. So, Mridula, maybe I'll go to you. And we talked a little bit about energy independence and that challenge. This hard mic is really testing my ability to ask a question. So I guess a question for you is, you're also leading a business. You talked about 60% to renewable and so on, right? How do you see corporates should be doing more on this topic of energy independence? Because obviously for your business, for example, energy will be a big part of your input cost. And you've moved 60% renewable. But when I speak to some of my clients, they, for example, say things like it's hard to find the right 24/7 power source. There are a lot of issues they talk about. In your own experience and your advice to other corporate leaders, right? How should you start thinking about energy independence?
Are we talking energy independence at the
At a
company level
company
or the
level.
country
At a
level?
company level, hopefully that many companies like that will do this and eventually lead to, because you said you were surprised when you saw Ulka's chart of.
No, I was really surprised. Okay. And there's okay, so here's the thing, right? I think you will care about anything that you pay for. So sort of underlying theme there. We're a textile company. We don't make a lot of money. I think Thiago is somewhere there. So I mean, yeah, I think energy is probably our second biggest cost after raw material. And every unit we save is goes into the bottom line. So I think as sectors get more competitive, you will have a pressure to cut costs. So I mean, there I really have nothing to say. What I would advise fellow corporates here is that, look, net zero is coming. I'm hearing 2070, 2030. I'm telling you what I'm seeing with brands that are buying from us. We are talking 2030, 2025. Okay. I think already people are going in for certifications. If it's not today, I think the sooner you do it, the better, because it's coming, every Gap, H&M, everybody's saying, they're saying some really unrealistic stuff, but Europe is talking about a carbon border tax. So for those of you who don't know this, what Europe is contemplating is, if you export to Europe, they will put a carbon tax if your country is deemed to be a major emitter, right? Which they're saying it's a trade barrier. But I think this is something that every person here has to wrap their head around. That is, it's coming. So it's a source of competitive advantage. And the good thing is, it's a competitive advantage that can also cut costs. Now, where Naveen is coming from is, how do you deal with intermittency? Okay, because solar, the sun only shines in the day. So in the nighttime, it doesn't, you have to figure out something else. The second thing is wind is, there are 3 months where the wind season is. And then after that, what do you do? How geeky do you want me to get? Okay, not very geeky. So I will go into like tangent cone, the slot adjustment, etc. So I will stay away from that. But what I'm saying to my fellow corporate leaders is, it's when you get geeky that you get the advances, because the slots and how you adjust and etc. You can do it in a way that it starts making sense. And today we're in the midst of discussions on how to secure, start going from 60 to 90%, right? And the biggest obstacle for me is not the commercials of it. The commercials are extraordinarily compelling. I pay back within 15 months, right? To go from 60 to 90 renewable. Where I'm concerned about is I think energy costs may fall faster than what they're offering. So if I have a long-term contract, do I have an out clause? Is what I'm thinking, right? So I think for those of you who are not thinking, I think the discussion for many of us have moved forward, right? It's no longer intermittency, etc. There are people willing to offer round the clock and the slot adjustment, etc., to make things happen. The only other thing, I mean, apart from the fact that we're all leaders and students, etc., we're all voters. Okay, when we all shape the narrative as much as we're informed by it. Look, intermittency is a problem with renewables, and you have to wrap your head around it. So you need something that provides stable power. So do give nuclear a chance, because I think if you say no to everything, you're never going to have a solution. So, either there are only three ways you can store. You can do batteries, which means minerals, and I'll go into it when we talk of innovation. But battery, minerals, China, okay? Or you have hydropower, then you will have to start looking at stuff like Joshimath happening, right? Or you have coal, or you have nuclear. It's like saying, when you have your child, there's some trade-off in everything. So I think we have to be realistic about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mridula. That was quite a good, comprehensive, non-geeky answer. Thank you. Appreciate it. I might ask Ulka, you put up the marginal abatement cost curve, and you showed that a lot of things that we can do are actually kind of in the money, right? Meaning you do them and it's actually beneficial. It costs you less to do it. So what's getting in the way? What are the kind of challenges that you see? Well, it should be done. I mean, looking at that from an economist perspective, you should say, boss, go do it tomorrow. But it's not happening. What are you seeing as real challenges in the way?
Well, some of the challenges you identified, right? The regulatory issues, the land issues, all of that. I think my interest also is, when you see those curves, they pick up after 2030. So the pre-2030 is actually the easy part. And then you get into what we call deep decarbonization. And that's where things like offshore wind will become important. And you need viability gap financing for that. Or for example, you might need hydrogen electrolyzers to be scaled up. Because that industry emissions curve, the reason why it's surprising is because you can't electrify everything in industry. So you can't have renewable energy for everything. You finally need green hydrogen and other sort of process changes. And that's why for the steel industry in particular, this carbon border adjustment tax is such an important thing to deal with. It's not just the carbon border adjustment tax. The same competitiveness issues are coming in other ways. For example, in the US, as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, there were a bunch of things. One of them is that consumers get a tax rebate if they buy an electric vehicle, but only if that electric vehicle was manufactured in North America, and only if the minerals for the batteries of that electric vehicle were either mined in North America or were recycled in North America. So Canada, US, Mexico. So I think for us also this issue that has been coming up again and again, which is the dependence on China and all that for the critical minerals. And this also links to the issue of job creation. Circular economy in a way that creates jobs and is more than just a slogan, because material efficiency is a very powerful lever when you see our model compared to energy-related stuff. Can we think of some ways of urban mining or some ways of refining or processing the lithium in a way that creates jobs? I think I'll end with one more point, which is, you said sort of putting a price on things. You referred to not caring for things that don't have value. So we've been working a lot with companies on having an internal price on carbon. And that has become like a precursor also for thinking of a carbon market. Now India, the government of India has plans to have a carbon market. And we conducted a little mock carbon trading experiment with 21 big Indian companies. And we found that over 3 rounds of trading, the cost of meeting their emissions commitments, so these were pretty robust science-based targets, the cost was reduced by 28%. So that was pretty substantial, right? I mean, the flexibility that it gives you, and this was just 21 companies. Imagine how much better it would be if you had more diversity in the market. And if you were to extrapolate this, even with existing voluntary corporate commitments plus trading, India could save 1 billion tons of CO2 cumulatively between now and 2030. So there's a lot that can happen. We need various financing, regulatory, and skilling actions to happen.
It's great. Thank you. And maybe on that note, if I can ask Mridula another question, and then I've got this chief at which I'm going to go through now. But let me ask this question. You talked about startups that you're investing in. You said a few months ago you were here, this room was full. What is the role of technology innovation that you're seeing live right now in energy independence? How are you seeing it playing out?
So, okay, so I'll go back to the event that happened 2 months ago. So one of the things, energy independence, the biggest form of energy we import is oil today, right? And the clearest way to get independent of that is either use less oil. My pick would be public transportation, but I think the world's imagination is now caught up on electric mobility, right? Electric mobility is changing so fast. Like many of us have missed the boat, even people like me who do climate tech and all that. There was this young man, okay, he's not much older than many of you in the back. He had like a PowerPoint slide 2 months ago, okay, and he said, I'm not really taking money. That's how valued he was. He comes and tells an investor, I'm not really taking money, because he's got people fighting to give him money. And I'm not joking. There's a electric mobility startup that I put some money in 2 years ago. They're growing like this. They're a unicorn. So they're going to be a unicorn, I think, sometime next year. It is ridiculous how fast people are growing. So that's one. Urban mining is like a huge, urban mining, for those of, just to sort of think, your phones, your TVs, etc., right? Once you get, you throw them away, people can collect them, take them apart, and inside them, there are a lot of the minerals that become very useful for, making batteries and things like that. Rather than get cobalt and lithium from elsewhere, you can get it from electric waste. So that's urban mining, and that's going to be a very hot topic going forward. The innovation is just exploding. So let me give you one example of a company I've invested in. One of the things that we, I do this, and I'm sorry, it's not a great character trait, but it's a useful character trait. When you're eating in lunch, I want you to go and look at the dustbin and see how much food you wasted there. Or not you, we have wasted there. Now that food has calorific value, right? So at home, what we do is we take that, and I have a small biogas plant at home, and we use it, and we save about a cylinder a month from the food waste at home. Now there is a startup that has taken this idea and put it on steroids, right? One of the things India desperately needs is natural gas. But what the startup does is it takes food waste from Bangalore, from Tirupati, from various places, makes it into compressed natural gases, which it then sells to restaurants. This is a big thing coming up in India. And I think it's a very exciting thing. It's a great way of energy independence, and I'll stop there.
It's wonderful. Thank you for those very practical examples. And I'm hoping that people here are inspired by some of that to go do their own startup, right? That could be MMA's contribution to energy independence as well. Yeah, so you know who to tap also. This is all the first row. I'm going to ask some questions from what the audience has given. Let me start with this. This is from Dharmender, the deputy manager at NTPC Limited. Dharmender, are you still in the audience? We can just see who you are. Thank you. Thank you, Dharmender. I'm going to read out your question. This is to you, Ulka. It's a somewhat technical question, but it'll be good, right? And it's a question that's often asked, which is, in the electricity carbon emissions graph that you have shown, does it include the carbon emissions responsible for production of infrastructure in the renewable sector? So are we counting carbon produced? I could even extend this, by the way, to lithium-ion batteries and so on, right? Are we, in your estimation, are you also taking into account what it takes to produce life cycle emissions?
To some extent, yes. So what we have, what I showed you is something called a systems dynamics model. And the whole point of it is to incorporate these feedback effects, these interactive effects. So yes, for example, if more green hydrogen is to be produced and more the renewable energy required for that also. I think I'll keep it short. If it was that specific an answer.
No, that it was a very specific question, a very specific answer. The short answer was yes, it's included. I will, because that last question was not a question. It was a speed up message, which I will take. Okay, so there's been two questions that have come from Vignesh, who's an MBA student at DG Vaishnav College, and Abdul Rahman, who's a student at Madras University. Vignesh and Abdul Rahman, if you're here, you could just show us who you are. Thank you. Thanks for these questions. These both come to the recent discovery of 5.8 or 5.9 million tons of lithium in Jammu and Kashmir. Do you think this will help the battery demand, help meet the battery demand of EVs and bring more foreign investors to the country? To anyone, I can also answer it, but okay, thank you. It was very quick, why don't you? So the short answer is yes, but it's not sufficient. I mean, we need a lot more, but it's a good start, right? It's a good start. I think a lot more needs to be done. So I used to live in Australia, in Western Australia, which has among the purest or the best deposits of lithium anywhere in the world. It's called rock lithium versus lithium that's actually mined from sand or from, it's more granular. The reality is the given increasing demand for purity of lithium carbonate or lithium hydroxide in batteries, you need purer and purer forms of lithium. So the cost of not just mining, but actually extracting and making that lithium usable in batteries that are now in the Teslas and other EVs going forward have to be at a certain level. I think it's a great find. I think a lot more needs to be done to see how economic it is and how it can be used. But what this is telling us is we need to be exploring a lot more for these minerals, right? The reality is that we have not done this for many, many years. And now is the time to be actually looking for these because like we talked about earlier, and Mridula also alluded to, that energy security issue is quite real. So great start, but very far away from making this to production. Time to production is quite significant. I've seen this firsthand. It takes quite a time to prove the resources, to then make it mineable, and then to find the downsides. I'm not meaning to be pessimistic about it, but I think we have to be realistic that this is a time away, but a good start to invest in more mining exploration. So that's, and I'll probably ask one more question. And this is to both of you, which is from B. Rajesh from Sundaram Clayton Limited. Rajesh, you're here? I don't know how I've done this, but I've only got the backbenches. Somehow I've been lucky to get backbenches. Thank you. What is the target that industries and MSMEs should take for the country's carbon net zero journey? Yeah, please go for it, Mridula.
See, I like talking about MSMEs because they're largely ignored in the whole thing. Everybody talks big industry, and it's a very different reality for small and medium enterprises. There are two things that will really help MSMEs one is, I think the hand-holding by associations cannot be overstated. Okay, large companies have like sustainability, CXO positions. You've got all the capability within your company. Small companies cannot afford to have that, right? So I think the hand-holding by associations is very important. Secondly, I think large companies buy from MSMEs, right? So I think needs to be some understanding. Like you said, one of the big problems for all the extreme right side of your graph was things which were negative. The payback was very quick, but they had higher upfront investment costs. Small companies don't have balance sheets and have a very high cost of capital. That is something that, I'm seeing some OPEX model kind of solutions coming where, you just pay on a per use basis for energy, etc., which makes it easier for smaller companies to adopt. But I'll leave it with, just 3 points. One, associations need to educate, handhold, all of that. Second is models either by buyers or by other intermediaries in terms of making energy efficient, going for renewables cheaper for small and medium companies. And yeah, third thing is just, banks being a little.
Could I add a third, if that's okay? So one of the things that I'm quite fascinated by is the role of ecosystems. So for example, a couple of the companies we're talking to are thinking of how to make their suppliers and the broader ecosystem, especially in the auto space, right? But equally in pharma. So I've got a company that I work with in the pharma space that's thinking about not scope 1, scope 2, which is what you can kind of in your shop or the power you buy, but scope 3, which is all the materials coming in, the logistics costs, etc. And what we have found increasingly is these companies are now looking at how do I shape the ecosystem? This has happened before, by the way. So if you think about quality of our products that we used to buy, whether it is a car, whether it's a cell phone, whatever it is, you can think of, I don't know, I mean, some of you are reasonably young, but if you think 20 years ago, the quality of what we used to buy and the reliability of that quality versus now. So many sectors have gone through a quality journey where they have not had to do just what they had to do, but they had to work with a whole range of MSMEs to change it. So I do think that that type of a journey will happen. And so it is also incumbent upon the large companies to bring their supply ecosystems along with them.
But Naveen, I'm just going to add something here. Okay. In the beginning, I said how textile value chains are shaping and everybody's saying net zero and all of that, all the compliances. I think, Ulka also said there's an upfront cost. I think large companies have to recognize it, that you have to pay for the upfront cost and then we can share the cost cutting down the line. I was in the,
No, absolutely.
I'm an unpopular speaker in the sustainability global textile panel because I'm like, sustainability sometimes is expensive, pay for it.
So when I say
Buyers like,
working,
no, no.
when sectors are working, that's what working means, right? Meaning you have to invest in the re-education, you have to invest in not just the re-education, but also in the capital required to make some of those shifts, right? And figure out how to do that. So I fully agree. I think
So-
that's the responsibility that larger companies have.
Yeah, that.
Excellent. With that, I apologize to the other questions. They were all excellent, but we had to pick only a few and we've done that. With that, I will declare the session closed and hand it back to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Naveen. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause. As he said, a lot of questions, many of them we received online as well, but sorry, we could not take all of them. We have taken first come, first serve. May now request to Mr. Srikanth, past President MMA, and Mr. Mahalingam to join us on the stage to present mementos to the dignitaries. Please come. First, memento to Mr. NaveenUnni for so well moderating the entire session. Ms. Ulka, may I request you to come and receive a memento, please? And Ms. Mridula. So, ladies and gentlemen, with this, we come to the conclusion of the special session 1, and now time for us to break for lunch. Once again, lunch on the 6th floor. So grab your lunch and try and be back by 1:55 p.m. We start the next session, a very, very interesting session on Atmanirbhar Bharat at 2 p.m. sharp. Have a great lunch.